Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the QT2 podcast series Why Mindset Matters in Endurance Sports and How a Coach Can Help the Athlete Navigate the Minefield. For this six-part series, we are welcomed to have QT2 owner and head coach Tim Snow. Welcome back, Tim.
How you doing, Ray?
Good. So, episode one, you set up the concept of mindset, what it is, and then also provide an overview of some of the different strategies that an athlete can use to improve performance on race day. Then episode two, we had the first strategy, which was setting and managing appropriate expectations. So now today, episode three, we're going to tackle the second strategy, which is recognizing your controllables and uncontrollables. So maybe we can start with first, what is a controllable? What's an uncontrollable? What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, that's a pretty good question to set the original premise, right? And I think it's pretty self-explanatory, right? The idea of controllables are the things over which you kind of have volition, or you can exercise the most control. I shouldn't define a word with the word, but um, and the things like your attitude, or your fueling, or your pacing, right? Things that you make a conscious determination to do or not to do, right? And your uncontrollables are things that kind of are outside of you, things that over which you have very little ability to manipulate or force to or bend to your will, right? Um, and and that's a key distinction in what we can talk about with regards to all this mindset and mental fitness stuff is really to kind of Mo I think most of the time, you'll can give me examples of otherwise. It's pretty a binary choice. There are things over which you have control and things over which you do not have control, and it's really important to be able to kind of, in your brain, go through life and label those things as accordingly, right? Not just in life, but in training and racing and all the stuff that we do. I think it's an important distinction to have, with all that stuff. So that's kind of how I think of it. There's things that you have almost total ability to get to bend to your will, and things over which just you have no ability to bend to your will.
Right. But I think that that is, you don't have the ability to bend it to your will or change it, but you have the ability to change how you respond to it, right? And that's the
Right.
right, the point of all this. And so we're in, I mean, triathlon, running, cycling. It's an outdoor, they're outdoor sports. And so you have to deal with all the stuff that comes with being an outdoor sport, right? So that's part of one of the, maybe one of the first uncontrollables out there is that you can't control the weather, right? On a beautiful day, everyone would love.
Theoretically.
Theoretically, okay, let's assume we can't control the weather here individually. I know I can't. So we are, it's like I would love every race. People are so happy if the temperature is 60 at the start and there's no wind and it's a slightly overcast and it's great. But like at USC Nationals that just happened a week ago, on Saturday, there was like crazy winds and chop and like so if I
Really hot, really humid.
really hot, really humid. And then, I mean, the next day didn't happen, and that was its own, thing. But every races, that's just the way it is. We race outdoors now, and so every race doesn't have perfect glass for the open water and doesn't have, the right level of humidity on the run. So, but we can make choices, right? So probably the one that comes up most is people fear pouring rain, cold pouring rain on race day. That's probably the one, at least for triathlon, that is most like, well, or overly
Hmm.
hot or whatever.
Yeah, so right. So I would say, if you think of the examples of something like um nationals, right? So I think the most dangerous from a mental perspective, is the overly hot, right? The pouring rain, I think, is a little different. It can be just as dangerous, if it is. it becomes physically dangerous as well. But I guess so does the overly hot, because I think what happens with the overly hot, and this happens in training, racing as well as training. It happens more often in training, right? Particularly during the summer months for almost all year round in Florida, except for um, you know,
January.
probably October through March, right? Um, is you have days where you go out to train, and kind of your training, our training intensities are often defined by some kind of, we we don't pick a 95-degree day to go and test and determine what our critical speed is or our critical power, right? We usually control the situation, the,
Mhm.
right? And and so then we have all these training intensities, and we set our expectations, and this piggybacks onto the conversation of setting and maintaining reasonable expectations as well. So then we have these days that are just outlier days, right? Or we have weeks that are outlier weeks, or months that are, say, outlier months. And we go out the door with the our typical training intensities defined, right? That were set in a controlled environment, right? And we hold ourselves to that level, right? And it doesn't usually go well, right? In fact, what you end up doing, if you do go out the door on a 95-degree day with training, with training intensities that were set on a 70-degree day, right? And you execute, because you can execute, right? You certainly can, right? But the training stress associated with that will be, who knows how much greater, 7 or 8, 9% greater than what you probably should have been doing, right?
Mhm.
And I think so. But what we're talking about here with regards to racing and stuff like that is and why I say it's kind of dangerous, is that we end up kind of evaluating our effort ourselves based upon what we feel like we should have been able to do, right?
Mhm.
But we weren't in the same environment at all. I had an athlete who raced nationals, and the as reported to me, there were people just not doing well on the course from the conditions at all,
Mhm.
right? And the athlete was recognized that fact, okay, like told me, was the one who told me that fact, and then in the very next breath, okay, was disappointed for having been slower,
Mhm.
right? And it's kind of like, were you talking, did you have an opportunity to talk to yourself in this situation? Right? Because if
Mhm.
you conferred with your previous self, I think you would have maybe drawn a link here, right?
Yes. Sure.
Um, and so that was something that was totally outside of this athlete's control with those conditions, right? The thing that the two things I think that are within the athlete's control are, in that situation, is to well, I would say one thing, I guess, because the athlete, I'm sure, ran as hard as they possibly could in those conditions, right? It was a
Mm.
race. They were racing nationals. But the thing that's within the athlete's control is to evaluate their performance based upon the reality of the conditions over which
Mm.
you had no control, right?
Mhm.
And there may not be really an objective way. We like to look at things and say, "Oh, we were this percent off. We could have done this. We could have done that. You were 12 seconds, blah blah blah." Right? But sometimes the uncontrollable conditions are such that you can't really objectively evaluate
Sure.
the performance. It's not reasonable, right?
Mhm.
But to just kind of go through a subjective evaluation of, yeah, that was pretty damn, that was pretty damn hot, and I held strong, right?
Mhm.
What were the things over which I could control that were not objective, right? Did I maintain focus? Did I tough through those conditions? Was I reasonable in my pacing? Those are the kinds of things that she would she would have had total control over, um, and to evaluate against that, right?
Right.
Um,
And some of it too, like some people don't race as well when in the heat, right? And so mentally you could walk into it going, oh my God, it's 90 degrees, it's so hot, I can't do it. I'm going to be so bad in this, and that like having to reset the dialogue with yourself. Because if you walk into it figuring that you're not going to race well in that and saying, well, everyone's here. And what I can do is make sure I take in my hydration and make sure I adjust my pacing and make, like that there's ways to attack it that are a lot more productive.
I just had 5 athletes, no, 4 athletes, 4 athletes, complete, Leadville, right? Leadville, the mountain bike race at 10,000 feet is the same exact thing as heat, in my opinion, right? It's one awful uncontrollable for another, right? And, um, when you say some athletes don't race well in the heat, like, when the temperatures get extreme,
No
and
one
as
does.
well as the elevation, nobody races well in those conditions, right? And so I always tell athletes, my big thing on my bulls is altitude is an attitude, right? It's if you can go to that event in those conditions, right? Or in the extreme heat, in those conditions, I have to remind myself of this all the time if I go out for a run on a really hot day and I fail. 90% of the time I fail, right? If I can remind myself that in these conditions, I am lesser, right?
Mhm.
And it's not me, right? It's not an evaluation of me. It's just the conditions. It's something over which I have no control. And then I can control the fact that I'm lesser and I can behave accordingly such that I can perform as well as possible in those conditions, right?
Mhm.
So the athlete who steps into a 95-degree day or 10,000 feet and says, okay, whatever I'm accustomed to doing, I can't, in level, you can't bring your sea level self to
Mhm.
10,000 feet. You just can't do it, right?
Mhm.
And the same, like when we from the Northeast go down to Florida, in, I mean, when we often go to Florida in February for the Florida camp, it's 30 degrees here, 35 degrees here on a regular basis. Down there, it's 75 degrees. 75 degrees for some is nice, right? But when you go from 35 to 75 and go work out, that's a big change, right? And you have to accept the fact that lesser in these conditions. And that's something over which I have control. I have no control over the conditions in Florida. I have no control over the elevation in Leadville. But I do have control over how I meter myself out.
Mhm.
Right. And so that's kind of what I talk when I'm talking about the idea of going around and distinguishing, what's the thing that over which I have control and over which I don't have control as I look through the world, right? That's kind of what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
Right. Um and and so it's just a hugely important aspect
Mhm.
to
Yeah, and it
to
could.
to things.
Yeah, I mean, and so we've been talking about weather conditions, but it could also be, you're on your bike and you get a flat. Well, what are you gonna do? Like, you're gonna call the race, you're gonna change your flat, you're gonna like, you know, adjust what your expectations are for the leg of the race, or, worse yet, you're in a crash or you find yourself in the penalty box. I mean, I guess you have control of finding yourself in the penalty box, sorta, not really. Sometimes you get passed and you're just in the wrong place at, the wrong time. So, but I mean, those are things that can affect your race, but how much they affect it depends on how you respond.
Well, I think all of
What's
in
happening.
every single example you just gave, right? There are you have in every single example, there is at some point a point of control
Right.
over, right? And it always comes into um kind of what you do with it. What you do with whatever occurs, right? And so for me, it goes back to the idea of Viktor Frankl, right? In between stimulus and response, there is a space. And within that space, there is a choice, right? And so from that, you have this kind of idea that stimulus, you probably have very little control over whatever it is that's going to occur, right? But
Mhm.
you have, if you can create the space, and that's kind of the idea of um, kind of built around recognizing the controllables and the uncontrollables, right? When the uncontrollable occurs, allow enough space between it and how you respond to it to make sure that you have the opportunity to respond. So in this space here, right, you make a choice of, am I going to work through this and control the situation as best I can, right? Or
Mhm.
control myself within this situation, or am I going to purely react
Right.
to the situation? Um, and I think that's really that goes a lot into the idea of recognizing that those uncontrollables and understanding that that not only are they uncontrollable, but you have no control over them,
Right.
right? And so that allows you the opportunity to to know that you have to make space,
Right.
right? If you get a flat tire, right, you you can you can cry and bitch about it all you want, okay? But your the thing that you can control is beginning the process of fixing it,
Mhm.
right? Because regardless of whatever happens, the tire has to be fixed on the other side of it for you to continue on, right?
Mm.
And so the sooner that you that you execute that control, the piece of control that you can have, right?
Mm.
The sooner you're back on your bike, right?
Right.
But the more you wallow in this idea of this, like that this thing happened to you, right?
Mhm.
The longer it's going to be that you're on your bike, or the more sloppily that you're going to fix the tire and fumble. It's going to take longer, right? Um,
And I mean, fixing a flat is sort of a good example of where you can practice what your response would be if something like this happens. Because getting a flat tire is happens commonly enough. And it could be like, I mean, if you don't have the tools that you need to fix your flat, well, then, you're not going to go anywhere. If you don't know how to fix a flat. So you can actually say that this is something that might happen to me and take the steps that you need to be ready that if it does happen, that you can get it done and get back on your bike.
and that intermingles with another thing that we'll talk about, which is coping visualization,
Right. Mhm.
right? And trying to be as predictive as possible
Mhm.
towards the things that could go wrong, right? Understanding that you can't possibly be predictive of everything that will go wrong,
Mhm. Mhm.
but if you constantly work at it and develop I would say, a protocol for problem solving, right?
Mm.
And we'll talk about this, I think, later on, right?
Yeah.
But you can work that muscle,
Mhm.
right? So that when the thing does occur, you at least it may be the first time that thing X has occurred to you, but it's not the first, but you have the tools, so to speak, to be able to work through it as much as you possibly can, right? But
Mhm.
some things may be out of your control. If you don't have a tube with which
Mhm.
to fix your tire, well, then you're just shit out of luck, right?
Yeah. I mean, but there's also too, like that one. I mean, it seems like there's an obvious answer to this. You have a flat, you fix it, or you choose not to. When I race short course, I didn't carry flat changing kit because I'm like, if I get a flat, I'm done with my race is over.
Mhm,
Different
mhm.
story if you're, doing a 100-mile race or you're doing an Ironman or whatever. But there's some, I think that people that are uncontrollable in the sense, okay, I think we talked about this offline once when I raced bikes, I didn't want to know what the course was. I made decision. What the course is out of my control, right? The course is what the course is. I made the decision that I didn't want to know what the course was because I raced better that way. Other people can look at that and say, I'm going to go and I'm going to preview every like inch of the course. I'm going to ride it 10 times. I'm going to do so. I mean, how we respond to those uncontrollables, how we try to control the uncontrollables maybe is individual too, though, I think.
Yeah, what was it that made you not want to know what the course is? Because
I
that's
would
very
always race.
non-triathlete-ish.
I would race too conservatively if I knew what was coming, which
Okay.
doesn't in bike racing at
Right,
all.
right, right, right.
Right? So that was me. That was like something that was I didn't want to know. And I like because whenever I did it, I never raced as well. So not
Now,
necessarily
were
triathlon,
these
but
in
bike
road
racing.
races or crits?
Road races, stage racing,
Road.
that kind of,
So
yeah.
okay, okay, okay.
Yeah.
So it's not like you began to know the course as you went along, right? Now, do you
No.
find that to be true of races that you've done multiple times now? That do you race if you let's say that you did a race in Lake Placid, right? And then
Mhm.
another year you did the same race in Lake Placid. Would you expect yourself to be a little more conservative on the course
You
as a
know what?
result?
No, I don't think so. I think triathlon and bike racing are different too, because bike racing is a lot less in your control. If you're not with the pack, you're not with the pack, you know. So pulling back and being like, oh, this hill is hard doesn't do you any good. So you might as well just try to stay, which is
Hmm.
different than triathlon, where you do, I think, have your strategy to how you can best ride. That's much
Yeah,
more
yeah,
in
yeah,
your
yeah. I see what you're saying.
so
I see what you're saying
yeah,
because
yeah,
successful triathlon racing is oftentimes an exercise of measuring out effort, right?
yeah.
Of actually being conservative,
Right.
until later on.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that makes good sense to me.
So, yeah, I mean, and then I think one of the most common ones that people stress about a lot in triathlon is the swim portion of it. Is it going to be wetsuit legal or not? I mean, like you go on to every Facebook chat room and they're like, is it is not? It's like, well, just bring them both and be prepared because you don't know what it's going to be. But the like the anticipation and the anxiety that you see coming along with people like going, I can't race without a wetsuit, you know?
Yeah, I I struggle to understand the level of anxiety that develops as a result of a non-wetsuit swim. I because I have to venture to guess that a person who has properly trained for, say, a long distance triathlon has swum plenty and probably in the high 90s% of their swimming was done in a without a wetsuit on.
Yeah.
And so there's some piece of me that I know that the open water creates this idea of like some level of the unknown, but most of the swim venues that we go to are they're pretty known, right? Like they're pretty well understood. So I have to believe that other than the irrationality of the simple term open water, right?
Mm.
Um, that this has something to do with not measuring up to a certain time standard or pace standard that they want to. And then that goes back to, I think, some of the heat conversation that we had earlier, which was the idea of and the idea of expectations, right?
Mm.
Which is, well, you shouldn't be fast. Like you should be slower,
Yeah.
probably in a wetsuit. 99% of us will be slower without a wetsuit on, and so you shouldn't be holding yourself to those standards. Um, yeah, that's always been a really interesting area of anxiety for me because um, other than just the idea that the natural, perhaps, fear of open water. I understand, say, in an ocean swim, I can more understand it, but with a lot of the swim venues that we have, like in lakes and ponds, it doesn't make a boatload of sense to me. So I think there's something else going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because a lot of people, well, maybe it's because they don't have a lot of open water swim experience. A lot of people don't. So they're used to the
Hmm.
open water and the wetsuit and the comfort of that. But it's incredible, like how much it's like up, down, is it going to happen? But I'm going to say that no matter what, even if it seems like it's not supposed to be wetsuit legal, bring your wetsuit because I did a rookie mistake at least 10 years into my triathlon career of assuming something was not going to be wetsuit legal and then having them, I don't know where they measure the temperature that they found it wetsuit legal, but they did. And I was sitting there at the starting line without my
I
wetsuit.
I went so extreme once that I brought my wetsuit to Kona. which was dumb. But you know what? You never know.
No, you never know. I mean, leading up to Nice last year, it was not, it was not, it was not. And then at the very last minute, it was,
Yeah,
so
right.
it's like you never know. But I had one race, it was actually triathlon world championships where it was not wetsuit legal and the lake was so deep that I panicked and I'm like, I'm, longtime swimmer, totally comfortable in the water, never had an issue. And all of a sudden I realized that it was like 300 feet down from where I was swimming. And I panicked in the water without the wetsuit because I'm like, if I get kicked, if I get hit, if I get, and that caused me, it took a while to work out that stress. Like, and my response to that panic was to make sure I wasn't near people. Like, I just want to make sure that
Mm.
nobody was gonna like hit me in the head or something like that. So,
So perhaps my gripe with people kind of having that, in my opinion, like kind of accentuated anxiety around non-wet system. Maybe it's just it's biological, right? Maybe it's just because we're land animals, right?
yeah,
We're not necessarily supposed to be in the water. Um, that maybe that's why maybe that's why it occurs. That irrational that jump towards the irrationality, you
yeah.
know? Yeah.
But it is something though, how there is so much stress about it. I mean, probably more than anything in triathlon is that question in the water. Um, but at the
But
end of
again, that's
yeah,
not that's not something you can control, like on race
no,
day, right? And so it really boils down to the thing that you can control is what are you going to do with it, right? Like if you're going to, you can't control whether or not you're going to have anxiety, right? But once you do have that anxiety, right?
mhm,
How are you going to work your way be past that, right? And that goes back to that space between that stimulus and that
mhm,
response, those two things, and that choice. Now I know that it's and that choice is so hard to make because to make it, you have to know that you have the ability to make it,
yeah,
right? That's the piece that's hard, is to know that you have the ability to make a certain choice, right?
mm,
And but if we can constantly be if we can be in a constant state of kind of assessing, our ability to make a choice, right? Then we can better recognize these uncontrollable stimuli that occur, and that we have to then have some level of response to it.
right. Yeah, years ago, I did a triathlon camp with, and Gwen Jorgensen was there and her coach. And her coach said something at the time. He said, triathlon equals shit happens. It's what you do with the shit that counts. And that's really, I think, another way to say the same thing that we've been talking about all the time. Like all the stuff, it's going to get thrown out. We're not in a bubble. Stuff, so many, we are so small, insignificant in the world compared to everything that's going on around us. But just because something happens doesn't mean it has to derail our process or, we
And
can,
that goes towards the coping visualization, um and and just recognizing that, okay, when X occurs, now I need to go into this kind of management, right? I need to manage whatever situation. I think that's like that in anything in life, right? Like very rarely is there a day that goes exactly as you had planned it, right? um but you just have to go through and be as responsive to the different things that occur as possible. Most of them not a big deal. But there's all kinds of uncontrollables that occur every single day that don't necessarily uh, too negatively impact us. But I think that when we put ourselves into a race situation, and we talked about that, like this is all about those expectations. It's all about coping visualization as well as other visualization. We put ourselves into this race situation, and if all we've thought about is like how well it can go, right? And we set this expectation about like PRs and everything that we do, right, is like taking away from our ability to be the best. Everything that I'm sorry, that's not everything we do. Everything that occurs, every single uncontrollable is kind of like taking away from our ability to PR or be at our best, to have the best possible performance, right? Well, that's a pretty negative way to look at things, right? Um, and so we have to have kind of we have to have like a range of expectations, right?
Mhm.
If the world goes like I've done a lot of Ironman races in my life, and I can think of one where if I look back at it as a that was a perfect day. Like I can't think of something that went wrong. I'm sure something did, right? But I can't really think of something that went wrong. Every other one, right? And so where something went wrong, right? That
Mhm.
had to be managed, right? But if you never allowed for that possibility in in your brain leading into it or during it, you you can have that can be a tough road to to work your way through and work your way out of.
Yep.
So
Yeah. All right. I think we're going to leave this one here. And when we come back to the next episode, we're going to talk about goal setting.